Hello again. Chris Lee and Stuart Lackey here of Southeastern 14 talking some Kentucky football. Stuart, what a time it is. We got Kentucky unbeaten, basketball season a month and change away. Great times at Kentucky. If you're like me, baseball fan, playoff baseball on. Great time to be a sports fan this time of the year, sir.
Absolutely, man. Weather's changing, and fall is my favorite time of the year for a lot of those same reasons. And it was great to be a Kentucky fan on Saturday, as Cats took care of business quickly against the Gators to win their third straight in the series.
And I think in the time we took to exchange pleasantries, Ray Davis has run for another score.
Wow, exceptional! Before we started recording tonight, I mean, we were talking. That Gator defense came in, as the fifth in the nation in total defense, number one in the SEC against the run, and had a lot of people, scratching their heads after that game on Saturday, trying to figure out what's what. And again, it's another weekend of trying to understand who's really good in this conference, and what's next week hold. But exciting times for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it really is confusing, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I got a confession here. And look, I'm in Nashville. I cover Vandy a lot. So I saw a lot of Ray Davis, And I was pretty sure I knew what Kentucky was getting. And one thing I said is a lot of stuff that gets underrated: pass blocking, tough yards, catches the ball really well. Like a lot of things that when we look at running backs, we go rushing yards. And I just thought, I just don't know that he's going to be the home run guy that used to having. Man, I was wrong about that because he has ripped off a bunch of big plays. And you know what? In my defense, I think it could have been two things. First of all, he's probably behind a better offensive line, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, but I mean, that doesn't explain all the breakaway stuff. But if you think about it, he hurt his knee 2 years ago. So he's coming back from surgery. I don't know what the timetable on getting that gear back, the breakaway gear is. Maybe that was it. But whatever the case, man, he's best running back in the league right now.
He really is. He's leading the league in rushing yards. He's leading the league in rushing touchdowns. And you said it, 26 carries, 280 yards, and could have run for 300. The Kentucky record set by Mo Williams back in the 90s, right at 299. And Stoops took him out. And I think that was a smart move because you certainly don't want a freak injury on towards the end of a ball game like that. But yeah, 3 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving. I mean, it was a historic day. And I think that offensive line had something to prove. And of course, Davis, I think he's a good kid and gave them credit in all the post-game remarks. But, the other big thing too, and this is something that we've talked about: no negative yardage plays for Ray Davis on Saturday, no turnovers. And man, that's a good combination if he keeps playing this way.
How do they line up on the offensive line Saturday?
How do they line up?
How do you think they do? Because I know you got some parts moving around and coming back and all that.
Yeah. So Horsey is not listed on the 2 deep, Chris, going into this week. Stoops is typically hush around injuries. I think you'll see the same lineup that you saw Saturday. There were a lot of backups that played against Florida as well. So, I mean, it would be Eli Cox at center, Jagger Burton at right guard, and Dylan Ray over at left guard. And of course, the 2 tackles. Jeremy Flax, I think, won offensive lineman of the week in the SEC. And that kid, his story is just amazing. And he was challenged last year. The coaching staff basically told him that, we're recruiting over you. We're bringing in this kid from USC. And Flax, responded, and he's held on to that starting position and has done a great job. But yeah, you'll see the same unit, I think, that you saw last Saturday against Florida.
Okay, defensively, they shut Florida down again. They just continue to bring it every week. I don't know what I'd have to look at the high that they've given up of points is this year, but it's not a lot. But by the way, they're number one in the SEC in scoring margin right now. They're the only team in the top 10 in the country. Some of that schedule, I get it, but you can only play what's in front of you and take care of business, and they're doing an outstanding job of that.
Oh, they really are. They held, the defense held Mertz to Florida rather to 69 yards rushing, and Mertz, I think, was 25 for 30 for 244 yards. But 9 tackles for losses, 3 sacks. I mean, they did a really strong job against the Florida offense. I think 19 different players for Kentucky made tackles. And of course, you saw, some of the big plays. They got to the quarterback quite a bit and then forced the one interception that was just a physical play. The big guy, Deion Walker, Chris, was dropped back in coverage and actually,
Yeah.
and created a violent play to kind of pop that ball up. And then Trevin Wallace took it, the other way. So that was pretty exciting as well.
Yeah, 9 tackles for loss in the 60 tackles. Kentucky had 3 sacks, a forced fumble, and an interception. This time went to Trevin Wallace. Yeah, I mean they are getting it done with depth, and they're getting it done on a lot of levels.
Yeah, and like I said last week, they are deeper across the board on defense. Again, Stoops has had talented players. Josh Allen, obviously a top 10 draft pick, a number of years ago, and had some wrecking machine type of players on defense. But they've never had a team under Stoops anyway that has been this balanced and this talented. I mean, I think they've got 9 takeaways that leads the SEC, and you're seeing. Here's something that really stands out to me, Chris, and I've never seen this on a Kentucky team, at least consistently: the ability to make open tackles in space, solo tackles, where you've got a tight end breaking. I mean, there were a couple of times on 3rd and 4th down that Florida went for it, and Kentucky turned them over on downs with just great individual effort. I mean, Alex Safari, one of the defensive backs, I think had 8 or 9 tackles on Saturday. Just an unbelievable effort. These kids are playing, and they're not going to be fearful. Obviously, as we talk about Georgia here in a little bit, they're not going to be fearful or scared going into Athens, into that environment. They'll be ready to play, and they've got a lot of experience now. So I think that sets up well for them.
All right, the biggest concern at this point is Devin Leary, I think, in that passing game, and it's not all on him. They had more drops this week. Yeah. Dropped a touchdown. I mean, yeah. The bad news, Devin Leary goes 9 of 19 for 69 yards Saturday. The good news is Devin Leary goes 9 of 19 for 69 yards, and they beat Florida by 19 points. So depending on how you look at it, either quarterback's a problem or the minute that it quits becoming a problem, which if he plays up to what he's done before, then hey, look out, right?
Well, well, you would hope, right? His best football is ahead of him, and all of the coaching staff, keeps saying that his best football is ahead of him, and they've got to get some things dialed in. But yeah, it's I call it the 2-2-2, right? Every game, this has at least been the formula. There's been 2 drops. There's been 2 just kind of complete whiffs on throws where he's just been completely off the mark, and then he's had a couple of passes batted down at the line of scrimmage. And you got to remember, he's 6 feet and maybe 6'1" in cleats. And he's not a tall kid. So that would explain some of maybe the batted balls there at the line of scrimmage. But I mean, again, he's a 57%, completion rating as an SEC passer. And that's just not good enough. And the good news is, though, if there is good news, if he just gets 5 or 6 more completions a game, suddenly he's a 70% passer, most likely. And that's good enough for Kentucky to win if they can continue to run the ball and then play defense the way they're playing. He does not need to be elite. He just needs to be consistent and needs some help from his receivers, Chris. That's the bottom line.
All right, the Georgia game coming up. Biggest one Kentucky's played in October since God knows when. You would have a better idea than I would. But and I feel like this is a recurring theme with the SEC. I look at Georgia. I don't know if this is a team that's down or just the light hasn't come on yet. In spite of that, Georgia's 5-0 and second biggest scoring margin in the league to Kentucky. So we've seen Georgia play possum before, right? We saw them do it a couple times last year, mid and early season, and then you look up and they're winning the national title game by 58 points or whatever it is at the end. So I don't know what Kentucky's getting in Georgia. Maybe that's what Georgia's saying about Kentucky a little bit, because even in the 5-0 start, there's been halves where it was a little bit underwhelming. But here's 2 teams that are unbeaten, and I can't wait to see what we find out on Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So Georgia leads the series 62-12. I mean, they've dominated this series for forever. The last Kentucky win, Chris, was back in 2009 in Athens.
Wow.
And guess what? It was a night game. And so Georgia doesn't play a lot of night games, which is interesting, mostly because you're typically on that 2:30 Central CBS slot. But yeah, having it at a night game, and again, that crowd will be rowdy after a day of tailgating. But I think you got to start with Carson Beck. I mean, the kid is a legit SEC quarterback. I mean, he's 6'4". He's doing a great job, passing the ball. I think he's got a 72% completion percentage, and he threw over 300 yards against Auburn, and obviously linked up there in the second half in earnest with his All-American tight end Brock Bowers, who's the story of their offense. Georgia wants to run the ball, but surprisingly they haven't been that effective running the ball this year. I think Edwards is their go-to guy, but I think he only has 260 yards rushing through 5 games, and they've got a couple other guys that carry that load too. They're always blessed with a great running backs room, but it'll be interesting to see if they can run the ball against Kentucky. I think that's what they want to do, but man, I think Beck is really close as well. I mean, he's yet to play his best football either for Georgia.
Yeah, and that's a team with some offensive line issues too. Mims has been hurt. They've had running issues. They played receivers at running back at times this year. At times, Lad McConkey's been banged up. I think he's getting better for this. But, hey, man, Brock Bowers was just a one-man wrecking crew when it mattered for them against Auburn a week ago.
I mean, 30 receptions, 5 touchdowns, right at 350 yards receiving through 5 games. And he's obviously first-team All-American. He'll probably be a top 5 draft pick. And it'll be interesting to see how, Kentucky responds and matches up. I know, like, a lot of the first half, he was getting double teamed and kind of, was taken out. And when they kind of had to cover more of the field, I'm speaking of Auburn's defense there in the second half, you saw what he can do. I mean, he's a gifted athlete. I mean, he does everything at a high level. So it'll be a tough matchup for Kentucky to slow him down. I don't think anybody can stop that kid. So,
yeah.
But if, you talk about the defense, the Dogs are allowing, 113 rushing yards per game. That's 37th in the nation. Again, it's not great. So they've got some things to figure out. I think the rumor in kind of the camp of the Kentucky coaching staff is that, there's a lot of respect for that Georgia team because of the program that they are. But I think they really feel that this Kentucky team has a shot to do something special on Saturday.
Where do you think is the place that maybe Kentucky has got an edge on Georgia, if you can find one in this matchup?
I think it's the defense. Again, I mean, I'm going to just read some statistics to you. The Cats are number 1 in defensive touchdowns. They're number 9 in rushing defense. They're number 20 in scoring defense. These are national stats, obviously. Number 20 in total defense and number 23 in takeaways. This Kentucky defense has not allowed a rusher, a single running back, to rush for over 50 yards in their last 6 games. And again, you've got to consider the competition in some of those games, but the commitment and the dominance on the defensive side. And now you're starting to see, more of those guys on the defensive line getting pressure. Deion Walker recorded a sack against Florida. I mean, they're just tough to handle, and there's a lot of guys. As some of the folks in the SEC network would say, they got a lot of dudes, and they do. They've got probably more than they've had ever. And so I think Kentucky comes in with maybe, I don't know if it's an edge, but I think they can go toe-to-toe with Georgia on the defensive line and do a great job. They just got to hold Beck in check as well, because if he gets going, it's like, okay, pick your poison. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, here's a couple things that are interesting. Georgia's forcing turnovers on 0.9% of snaps. That is not really what Georgia does. They are not a get after you with extra guys and force turnovers. They're just will stone cold stop you on our talent. And Kentucky, on the other hand, is turning it over 2.5% of offensive snaps. So don't know if that's just how that resolves. Maybe Kentucky's a little more careful with the ball, and that would tilt it a little bit more towards Kentucky's favor. I'm not saying Kentucky would be the favorite, but I'm saying that would be a good development. And here's another interesting thing. Kentucky is leading the SEC in yards per rushing play, 6.9 yards per rushing play, when you take sacks out of the rushing yards. Georgia giving up 4.9 per carry, that is really uncharacteristic of this team. You brought that up earlier. So that's one of those things that if you're Kentucky, the recipe's right in front of you, right? It's try to run the ball, control the clock, and don't turn it over. And that's how you get the edge on that side.
Well, I think so. And the other thing too is, like in addition to turnovers, then you got to look at penalties. I think one thing that served Kentucky really well against Florida, Chris, 3 penalties for 25 yards. I mean, if they can play that type of mistake-free football on Saturday again, I don't know if they're going to win the game. I just think they have a great shot if they limit those mistakes. So, something's got to give. You've got, 2 really, solid teams. They both want to run the football. They both want to play really physical defense. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, I'm looking for how Kentucky starts this game in a very hostile environment against the number 1 team in the country, to see if what's happened. I mean, against Vanderbilt, against Kentucky, against Vandy, they got up 24-0, Florida 23-0. Can they start quickly and assert themselves on both sides of the football? That'll be interesting to watch.
And the penalties that I'll be watching for, the procedural ones, right? Do you jump off sides when the crowd goes crazy on 3rd down? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I know they've had some that were, I don't know if you'd characterize as carelessness on the offensive line at different points of this season. Maybe is a good way to put. My memory's fading as we get further from those penalties, but
understand.
in any case, that's something to watch.
Yeah. So it's hard to believe that Kentucky's in a position where they have a chance to do something that hasn't been done in a long time. I think the last time Kentucky beat a number 1 team was in October against LSU, all the way back in 2007, when LSU actually won the national title that year with 2 losses, and Kentucky was one of those losses. And so, certainly there's a history there, albeit, somewhat distant, but I think the Cats will be ready for the challenge, and we'll see what happens. I thought it was interesting though. I think the early line opened up, I think, at 21 points. And I think what did the official open at it? Well, I guess it's at 14.5 right now. I think that's the line.
Yeah. And this is Sunday night. I had 14.5 over under of 47.5, which makes for 31-17 is your score there.
Yeah.
According to Vegas.
Yeah.
So
we'll see. Yeah.
Now I'm looking at some other models. Everything's between 12 and 16. The most optimistic SP Plus has got Georgia by 12 with the home field. So everybody's got it double digits.
Well,
but I mean, that's Georgia, and look, it says something about Kentucky too, because what South Carolina went there a couple of weeks ago was plus 27. So that's I say it's double digits. Like South Carolina led them 14-3 at half.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I just think it's that type of year because of all the reasons we've discussed, and throughout our time together, the transfer portal. There's just so many pieces. It's hard to scout these teams from year to year, and you want to think back that, hey, well, last year this happened, or a lot of these rosters have turned over to such a high degree at starting positions. You don't know what you're going to get, and so it makes it, I guess, fun in one aspect, but it's also I think it explains why a lot of these teams they don't have the mental experience or the I guess the memory rather to be intimidated or think about last year. They're just trying to play winning football with a bunch of new guys for the first time, and you're seeing a lot of these. I believe that's why you're seeing a lot of these types of scores because of that. Kentucky's kicking game, I mean, it's probably been the best it's been. And, their starting kicker hit a 50-yarder that iced the game against Florida. He doesn't know anything about Kentucky, Florida. He's just doing his job. He appreciates the rivalry, I'm sure, in the magnitude of the game, but he's just out there doing what he does. He's a good kicker, and he hit a 50-yard kick, and so you got to move on. So I don't know. It's interesting, but I'm hopeful that the Cats don't they have that short memory or maybe no reference point, and they go in and just play football Saturday night in Athens.
Well, Stuart, enjoyed having you on today, and look forward to talking to you next, either with a Georgia win in the back pocket and a bye at that point, or whatever. We'll figure out. There's always stuff to talk about, and basketball coming soon, as we mentioned. So looking forward to the double dipping soon.
You got you absolutely, Chris. You got to give me a prediction on the game though before we jump off. What do you?
Georgia by a touchdown.
Yeah. I think Cats cover. That's how I'll leave it tonight.
Yeah. All right. I think look, it's not what you want if you're Kentucky, but I think if you get it, it's a good harbinger for what's ahead. Seems like so.
Absolutely.
All right.
Appreciate it, my friend.
Absolutely. We are Southeastern 14. If you're looking for a place to advertise your business, we got quite an audience across all of our stuff here. Best way to get in touch with us, caroline.smith at southeastern14.com. She'll get you pointed in the right direction. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button and like button if you appreciate our content. For Stuart Lackey, I'm Chris Lee. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.